Hello, Rob and Mean here to talk about photogrammetry and two common problems that can happen with photogrammetry cases with all-on-X surgical procedures. Number one is we could have compromised alignment. Number two, we could be rushing around in a high-stress environment. So, Mean, thanks for being here today. At Rebel 3D, we are here to solve doctors' 3D problems. And so, Mean, love to just hear from you. These two common problems that you see, maybe just elaborate on those with photogrammetry, and then we'll dive into some great content on how we can do it the right way.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, for sure. So those two, we kind of boiled it down to those two common problems, right? So alignments are key, and of course, time is money, right? So anybody who's done a conversion the conventional way, if you take an existing denture, you're hogging out some holes in there, you're trying to pick up some temp cylinders after doing a surgery, you're playing clinician, you're playing technician. It's a lot to handle, right? So, and that same thing goes for fully digital workflows. I mean, digital makes things easier, makes things more predictable, makes them more efficient. But again, we have to know what data, when we get it, where we get it, and how these things correlate together, right? So, for those not familiar with working with photogrammetry and doing full arch all on X, same day, teeth in a day, there's many pitfalls, many areas where, you can come short. You can have some incongruencies with data as well that can cause some issues further on down the line. So let's chat a little bit more about that in the little bit brief time that we have here, Rob. And yeah, I'm looking forward to helping doctors with their fully digital problems, especially with these large workflows.
So photogrammetry is a piece of technology where you're taking a picture and capturing implant coordinates in 3D space. Maybe just talk about that. Why is it so accurate? What is photogrammetry? And then we'll dive in.
So photogrammetry, in layman's terms, is actually just taking a bunch of different photos from slightly different angles and stitching all that data together using a couple different algorithms to be able to correlate data and create 3D objects, right? So most hobbyists who are using photogrammetry were using it with, regular DSLR cameras, very much like the one I'm recording on right now. And they would take a whole bunch of photos inside of a sphere, stitch all that data together, and reverse out a 3D object from 2D images. So somebody thought of a really creative way of utilizing this technology in dentistry, right? And they said, what if we use a bunch of cameras fixed with known positions, and we capture some images of known scan flags, right? And we take these scan markers and we stitch that data together, and relative to each other, we can create XML or mathematical points in 3D space of how these relate to each other. Okay, that's great and wonderful, but why does that matter, right? We have intraoral scanners, we have many different ways of capturing data. What makes photogrammetry so much better? Well, what it does and it allows us to do is it allows us to capture this data in a very fast and efficient manner. And that data relative to each other gives us very reliable data across arch. One big kind of pitfall of intraoral scanners and most technology like that is that cross arch we see very often, more often than not, that it kind of fails to stitch the data across the arch reliably. So we have to rely on all these different kind of what I deem scan assist technologies, and photogrammetry being one of the more reliable ones. There's a couple pitfalls as well with photogrammetry. There's no perfect technology. There's no silver bullet. Photogrammetry has some drawbacks and limitations as well. But the benefits, I think, definitely outweigh them if you're doing the correct amount of volume of work, right? So if the cost, the upfront premium of purchasing a photogrammetry unit makes sense, it's definitely going to make your day-to-day life working with all on X much easier.
Awesome. So you recommend it as a piece of technology?
Do. Well, as a technician, it's kind of self-serving as well because it makes my job easier, right?
Of course, and more
definitely.
accurate, less remakes and all that fun stuff. So let's jump in.
Yeah. Let's you know what? Let me share my screen here. So photogrammetry, of course, like I said, is not a silver bullet for full arch implants, but it is a non-contact imaging. It has a very wide field of view, and the speed and the ability to capture all this stuff in a very efficient manner is really the big benefit of photogrammetry, right? So these 3 points here, the convenience, the ease of use, the reliability, the ability to be able to do this predictably time and time again is the big benefit of photogrammetry for sure. And those drawbacks that I was speaking about, of course, are the premium. You're paying a premium for these things. Some of them are, $40,000 US. You have some optical limitations. So if I back up to this one here, you can see here, this is a PIC scan flag. And you can see how the ones in front are a little bit more in focus. And if you look at the back, they're a little bit more out of focus. If you're doing something like on a mandible all on 4, not going to be a big issue. This is like an optical limitation of any kind of optical system. It's called depth of field. And essentially, if you stay within a depth of field or you have a very shallow depth of field, then you'll be fine, right? But if you're doing something like remote anchorage, something with pterygoids in there, more often than not, you're going to find that you might have to actually scan more than once. These scan flags might actually obscure one another. You might see the one is in front of the other, so you're going to have to actually take some scan flags out. And just a little pearl that I'm dropping in here, that you might have to take more than one scan, right? So some of the little pitfalls of actually working with photogrammetry. And then, of course, the other big question, of course, is compatibility and integration. Most designers use Exocad. I'm a big 3Shape guy. You can use it with any system. It's just understanding and working with designers that know how to integrate and, obviously working with the proper systems for compatibility.
Amazing. I'd love to hear that. And then, you had told me about, the difference between a same-day workflow where you're trying to do the entire surgical procedure same day versus the benefit of doing it in a sort of pre-design full arch workflow. Can you walk us through that and the benefit of, getting your records first and doing this pre-design flow as opposed to trying to cram it all into one day?
Absolutely. So what we're talking about here is you do it, all that information, you get all this information the day of, right? So what you're going to do on the clinical side is you're going to go in there, you're going to extract whatever teeth may need to be extracted. You're going to do a full clearance, do whatever bone reduction you're going to do the surgery. You're going to capture all this data, send it to your technician. They're going to design something up in, ideally an hour or so, or under an hour, so they can get it back to you for you to either 3D print in your office, or they're going to produce something for you and run it over if you have an in-house technician. So yeah, of course, there's tremendous benefit to doing that same day, but there's also huge drawbacks. So as a technician, I like to work with these cases. I like to, immerse myself a little bit and understand the patient's occlusion, understand their functional concerns, understand all the demands that we have working with these cases. And really delivering something that's kind of high quality is very difficult to do in under an hour, especially if you're doing, a double arch or something like that, even a single arch. If there's compromised occlusion, which there usually is on the opposing arch, you're going to make these decisions. You're going to have to make compromises with your decisions. And your decision-making ability is very limited in terms of the time that you have allotted for you. The patient's under anesthetic. You need that thing turned around very, very quickly. So what I advocate for typically is actually a pre-designed workflow. And what I'm talking about there is we take a lot of the records, we get all this information up front, in the consults and in a lot of the pre-treatment, where we have discussions with the patient in terms of what their expectations are, what clinical outcomes we're trying to hit, what kind of targets we want to hit in terms of aesthetic function, all that. And discussing as a team between the clinician, surgeon, technician, so we have this kind of united front and approach to the day of surgery. So what we're going to do is we're going to capture all this data. You're going to give it to me, the technician, or whoever you may be designing it, and we're going to do a pre-design based off of what the proposed surgery is going to look like. So we're going to do a proposed plasty, we're going to do a proposed design, bring in a diagnostic pattern, and save that data for when we have that day of surgery. So instead of the technician then having to make prosthetic decisions the day of, maybe this non-bone reduction, they have to kind of work on the fly, have a compromised prosthetic, we can go ahead, take this design, the day of, we're going to get all that data that you're going to supply to us, and we're going to take all that and marry all that data together. It sounds easy in practice, but of course, there's like I said, my word today seems to be pitfalls. There's challenges and pitfalls all along the way. And I'm going to share a little quick visual with you, Rob, here about what kind of comes up, right? That. So in 3D space here, when we have objects in 3D space, what ends up happening is all this data comes in, right? So you're taking a scan of an upper, you're taking a scan of a lower the day of. These are your pre-treatment scans, the day that you're consulting with the patient. And this exists in 3D space in correlation with each other because we took a bite registration scan and the scanner stitched these two together. The problem is The next scans that you're going to get in, or the day of, you're going to scan things in, and that data is going to be completely in a different 3D space. So they look very close. The arches are still orientated upwards, facing forward, but they're not aligned with one another. So if I were to take my design and try and connect the dots between this one and that one, this is going to be way off. We're going to have occlusion issues. We're going to have fit issues. We're going to have passivity issues because these two are not correlated with each other. And then any subsequent scans that we take the day of surgery, so this is the maxilla here. This one has the fiduciary marker with our scan markers in place. This one is our mandible. You can see it's kind of flipped completely 90 degrees relative to all this. So how do we connect all this data? You can see this jumbled mess of data. And this is what
like a kitchen sink. The more I scan, the better it gets, right?
Exactly. So it's the job of the technician to be able to unravel this puzzle, right? And correlate everything back to the original data so we're able to use it. So aligning data, getting good data, and making sure that all this data is aligned together in the correct manner is very critical for success, of course.
So those fiduciary markers give you the landmarks of how to align the data. And then you're able to do a design with the doctor before the day of surgery. And from a patient perspective, it's still, teeth in a day or, same day results. It's just that you're advocating for some pre-planning to design this floating hybrid that's just floating over the arch. There's no, obviously, screw channels in there yet because the implants don't exist in the mouth. And so then doctor comes in, does his bone reduction. He has a little more guidance and insight into how much he needs to do. And then he's going to take the photogrammetry scans day of surgery to give you the coordinates. And then what do you do from there to get the doctor his prosthetic with holes in it? And how much time does that take? So if you have the floating hybrid, he gives you the photogrammetry scan. How quickly do you turn the design back to him for printing?
You can get them back to them in consistently, I'd say 30 to 45 minutes. And that, again, as we're doing these, there's a specific scan sequence that needs to happen again. And I'm not going to go into detail about it here, but you need to know what data at what point, right? So you're doing the surgery, you do need to pause. So again, it's not like they're going to just do the surgery, do everything, stitch them all up, give us a photogrammetry scan, and they're done. So there is some work on the clinician side as well of knowing when to pause the clinical aspect, take out their scanner, take a specific scan that we need that has that fiduciary data so we can align everything back. There's specific steps that we need to take so that the technician, while the clinician is working, we're also able to take all that data. So let's say the surgery itself takes an hour and a half, for example. In that hour and a half, on our end, we're correlating data, we're adapting intaglios, we're adapting it to get a nice hygienic contour. Again, that's another benefit. If you have all this tissue there, it's very flappy, it's kind of, you have to make those compromises. You're not able to really sculpt these things. If you have a pre-designed pattern, you can already have a nice ovate hygienic form there. You're able to discern where we can apply a little bit more pressure, maybe a little bit less, based on communication up front and of course the day of.
That's amazing. So then 30 to 45 minutes and you're going to be delivering back a prosthetic that's going to look and fit great. And then what are the tips and tricks you give doctors on successful printing of that provisional?
So a little minor correction there, Rob. 30 to 45 minutes, we get the doctor the STL.
STL.
So the key here is that what we're doing is we're turning around the design. The big thing is this actually helps a lot because a doctor is no longer geographically locked to a technician that's local to them, right? So if they have a 3D printer in their office and they want to work with Minh Tran or they want to work with one of our other designers who are very talented, their ability to work cross-country with different time zones, we can get that as long as they have a printer or if they have a mill in the office, we're able to get them that file and they're able to print that in under an hour typically.
Amazing. And then any tips on like angle of attack or, printing pitfalls to avoid when the doctor is printing out that provisional while the patient's waiting?
Definitely. I think we'll do one just on 3D printing, right? We can spend an
Probably, probably.
entire episode just on that. But just a little tidbit here. There's two schools of thought in terms of orientation for scanning and for 3D printing. For those not familiar with 3D printing, the big thing is when you're printing anything, you have a build platform that's going into a liquid, and then it's trying to separate that build from the bottom of the tray. So you have excessive pulling forces and distortion forces that are happening on your pattern. And the key, of course, is if we're working with photogrammetry and we're trying to mitigate cross-arch distortion, we want to mitigate that as well in the actual product that we're producing. So orienting the print in a way that you minimize your 3D slices, exposing so much that it distorts the print from those separation forces, number one, is key and critical. So I always recommend kind of like the 35 to 45-degree angle to minimize to minimize the cross section. But the problem with that is it tends to also distort the connection that you're doing, right? So the screw seat, or if you're using a tie base, it sometimes distorts the actual tie base connection. So the other school of thought is that you orient it as flat as possible to your actual multi-unit interface. So I'm not sure which one's correct. There hasn't been really any studies or literature to prove one is better than the other. Those are the two schools of thought. I subscribe to the smaller cross section rather than the interface, just because I'm a huge advocate of still using titanium bases, because you can still visually verify passivity on a radiograph with a titanium base, where most print resins aren't radio opaque, so you can't see them. You're kind of relying on whatever screw system it is and that wedging effect to seat that prosthetic, which again, there's debate there, but we won't get into that.
Well, Minh, thank you so much. Tell us a little about yourself. How long have you been involved in 3D dentistry, helping doctors be successful?
So basically my entire career. So I was probably the second person in Canada, North America, I'm not sure how many, but that was way back in 2006, who was using 3Shape, right? So I've been behind a mouse and keyboard, designing on 3Shape, been using a wide variety of digital technology, milling, 3D printing, and everything else in between. So I think I'd like to say that I'm pretty well versed when it comes to digital dentistry. Full arch, I've worked with some of the best clinicians in the world in terms of doing full arch. We do some amazing surgeries, life-changing surgeries, doing zygomas, pterygoids, all those remote anchorage type cases, kind of last-ditch effort. So I'm pretty well versed in working with full arch. I've probably done a few thousand arches I got them under my belt at least.
So a few thousand arches. Sounds like you've spent more years in 3D dentistry than you have analog dentistry.
So I probably have about like 3 months. That's a different story completely. My first job in the lab was changing some plaster straps, and then some guy quit, and then they said, hey, you know what, you're going to go to the casting bench. Did that for about 3 months, and then the first lab I was at, they said, hey, we got a CAD CAM system. You're good with computers, so you're going to be our computer guy now. And here I am almost 20 years later, still working with digital dentistry. It's probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because if it was just analog, I probably wouldn't be a dental technician today.
I love that. I love your story, love your journey. We're kindred spirits with our passion for digital, for sure. If you want to reach out to Minh, you can find him at rebel3d.com/Minh. That's /MINH, and he'll be there to help. You can chat with us on our website, send us an email, and we'd love to help you be successful with photogrammetry. Minh Tran, you have a long list of tools in the toolbox, so maybe something upcoming on 3D printing, tips and tricks for being successful in the clinic.
Looking forward to that one.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This
Thanks,
was
guys.
fun.
Yeah, this was fun.
Cheers.